The box was oak, about the size of a hardcover book, with a brass latch that had gone green in the corners. A man from the funeral home carried it in both hands and placed it on my lap while I sat in the second pew. My grandmother had been in the ground for 40 minutes. My mother saw it first. She stood up from the front row, walked the 4 steps between us, and said, "Hand it over. That is estate property." Every person in the chapel heard her. I closed both hands around the box. The brass was cold. My mother's fingers stopped an inch from mine. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This is a true style story about the quietest kind of inheritance, the kind someone planned for years, hoping you would never need it. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My grandmother had 2 boxes made from the same tree. She told me that when I was 12 years old, standing on a step stool in her kitchen, watching her pull index cards from a wooden recipe box that sat next to the flour canister. The box was oak, with the same kind of brass hardware, small hinges, a latch that clicked when you pressed it. She said her husband, my grandfather, had them made by a carpenter in town the year they got married. One box was for recipes. The other was for something else. She never said what. I did not think about that second box again for 22 years. My grandmother's kitchen was the only room in my childhood that smelled the same every time I walked into it. Flour and dried rosemary, and the faint sweetness of whatever was cooling on the wire rack by the window. The light came through the glass at 7 in the morning and hit the brass on the recipe box so it glowed like a small lantern. I used to sit on the counter and read the index cards while she cooked. Her handwriting was precise, like she was writing a letter to someone who mattered. When I was 26, my mother took over my grandmother's care. That was the year Grandma Vivian started forgetting small things. Where she put her reading glasses, whether she had taken her pills. My mother moved in as the primary caregiver and reorganized the house from top to bottom. She said it was necessary. She said clutter confused Grandma Vivian. The recipe box disappeared during the reorganization. I asked about it once, maybe twice. My mother said she had put it somewhere safe. Safe, in my mother's vocabulary, meant where I decide. I let it go. I was teaching full-time by then, and I had learned that arguing with my mother was like grading a test a student had already turned in blank. The answers were not going to appear no matter how long you stood there. Now I was sitting in my car outside the chapel, the funeral over, 87 people filtering out in dark coats and polite murmurs. The locked oak box sat on my passenger seat. I had buckled the seatbelt over it. I do not know why. It just seemed like the kind of thing you do when you are carrying something that somebody fought to keep from you. The recipe box was for teaching me to cook. I did not know yet what the other box was for. My name is Wanda Whitfield. I am 34 years old, and I teach 3rd grade at a public school 22 minutes from my apartment. My apartment has one window, a reading chair I bought at a yard sale for $15, and student artwork taped to the refrigerator that I change out every marking period. The current collection includes a watercolor rainbow, a crayon drawing of a dog that might be a horse, and a self-portrait by a boy named Marcus, who drew himself with wings because, he said, he wanted to be ready in case he ever needed paper pizza slices. I read aloud from a chapter book about a girl who solves mysteries. At 3:15, 22 children filed out and I sat alone in my classroom and stared at the whiteboard until the custodian knocked to start vacuuming. The last Thanksgiving we all spent together was 3 years before my grandmother died. My mother hosted, as she always did, in the dining room with the good china. Plates she kept in a glass cabinet and washed by hand twice a year whether they had been used or not. The silverware made a particular sound against that china, deliberate and measured, like someone counting. That was the evening my mother announced she was managing Grandma Vivian's finances full-time. She set it at the table between the cranberry sauce and the sweet potatoes, the same way she announced everything, as if it had already been decided and the rest of us were being informed. "Mom's accounts are a mess," she said. "Bills not paid on time, prescriptions lapsing. I have reorganized everything. The medications alone require a spreadsheet." She listed the needs. Home aids 3 days a week, blood pressure medication, property taxes on the farmhouse, a new roof estimate. She spoke with the precision of a former accountant, which she was. She had worked at a regional firm for 11 years before leaving to, as she put it, manage the family. My father nodded. He said, "Your grandmother always had her own way of doing things. Your mother just wants to make sure everything is organized." He said it the way he said most things, gently, looking at his plate, trusting someone else to handle the parts of life that required confrontation. I asked if I could visit Grandma Vivian more often. My mother's answer was immediate. "She gets confused with too many visitors. It is better if I coordinate visits." I noticed she said, coordinate, not schedule. The difference mattered. Scheduling is logistics. Coordinating is control. That same weekend I saw Brianna receive a check from our mother. Brianna called it seed money for the boutique. I did not know then where the seed had been planted. My mother had a filing cabinet in the den, steel gray, 4 drawers, labeled by month. Every receipt, every bank statement, every tax document, filed, organized, cross-referenced. She was proud of it the way some people are proud of a garden. She kept it locked, but she made sure everyone knew it existed. "If anything ever happens to me," she would say, "everything you need is in that cabinet." I drove home alone that night. The highways were empty. I turned the radio off because the silence was easier to sit with than the pretending. 87 people came to my grandmother's funeral. I know the exact number because my mother kept a guest list on a legal pad in her purse, which she checked at the door like a hostess at a restaurant. My mother wore a tailored black dress with a single strand of pearls. She greeted each person by name. She touched arms. She accepted condolences with a practiced tilt of her head that said, "Thank you," and "I carried this weight" in the same motion. If grief were a performance art, my mother would have been exhibited at the Met. The eulogy was hers. She had not asked me to speak. She had not asked Brianna, though Brianna read a poem she found on the internet. Something about heaven and dandelions. My father sat in the front row and stared at his hands like they belonged to someone else. My mother's eulogy lasted 11 minutes. She spoke about the 7 years of caregiving. She mentioned the doctor visits. 231, she said, though I suspect the number was chosen for its specificity rather than its accuracy. She mentioned bathing Grandma Vivian when she could no longer do it herself. She mentioned the night she sat beside the hospital bed for 14 hours during a pneumonia scare. These things were true. My mother did do them. That was the part that made everything else harder to name. She did not mention that during those 7 years I had asked to visit my grandmother 23 times. She approved 9. The funeral director approached me after the service. He was a quiet man, mid-60s, with the kind of cologne that mixed cedar with something medicinal. It blended with the lilies from the flower arrangements into a smell I will probably never forget. He leaned down to where I sat in the second pew and spoke softly. "Miss Whitfield, your grandmother left specific instructions with our office. This was to be given to you and only you. She arranged it 2 years ago." He placed the box on my lap with both hands, the way you set down something that might break. His fingers were steady. He had done this before, probably not with a locked oak box, but with the careful delivery of things the living leave behind for people who do not yet know they need them. It weighed less than a dictionary and more than anything I had ever been handed. My mother was across the aisle in 4 steps. I have replayed those 4 steps many times since. They were not hurried. They were the steps of a woman who has been in charge of every room she has entered for the last 15 years and sees no reason this room should be different. "Hand it over," she said. "That is estate property." Her voice was calm, controlled. The same voice she used when she told the homemaid which shelf to put the towels on, and the voice she used when she told me my classroom was not a real career. It was the voice of a woman who had confused authority with ownership so completely that she could no longer tell the difference. 87 faces turned toward us. I could feel them without looking. The held breath, the lowered eyes, the way people go still when they are watching something they know they should not have to witness at a funeral. Brianna was in the 3rd pew. She froze with her phone halfway to her purse. My father looked at the floor. He did not move. He never moved. "I am the executor of the estate," my mother said. Her voice was still calm, but the word executor had an edge to it, the way a blade has an edge when it is held at the correct angle. "Everything goes through me." I looked at her. "The funeral director said it is for me." From her. 7 words. I had not planned them. But has not started talking yet. The latch was locked. A small keyhole. Old-fashioned, the kind you see on jewelry boxes from another decade. I tried a hairpin. It took 4 seconds. The lock clicked like a classroom supply cabinet. A sound I had heard 1,000 times. Inside, on a square of cream-colored felt, there was a brass key. Not a house key, not a car key. A small flat key with a bank name engraved on the bow. The kind of key that opens a safe deposit box. Beside it, a card folded once. My grandmother's handwriting, still firm. This was written before the tremor years. "Go to the bank. Ask for Colleen Marsh. Give her the key and your driver's license. She knows what to do. I love you, sweetheart. Grandma." I read it 3 times. I held the card up to the kitchen light to make sure there was nothing written on the back. There was not. My grandmother had said everything she needed to say in 29 words. The next morning, I called the school and arranged for a substitute. I told the front office I had a family matter. This was not a lie. The bank was 40 minutes east, in a town I had driven through but never stopped in. I parked, walked in, and asked the receptionist for Colleen Marsh. The receptionist made a call, came back, and said something I was not expecting. "She has been expecting you. Please follow me." Colleen Marsh was mid-40s, brown hair pulled back, a handshake that was firm without being a performance. She took the key from my hand and examined it the way a teacher examines a student's work. Closely, respectfully, with the understanding that what she was holding mattered more to the person who made it than to the person reading it. She led me to a private room. She opened a safe deposit box with the key and set a sealed legal envelope on the table between us. The envelope was thick. It had the name of a law office printed in the corner. Glenn Harrigan, attorney at law. Colleen looked at me and said, "Would you like a glass of water before you open it?" I should have asked why. The envelope held 46 pages. The cover letter was from Glenn Harrigan. It was dated 6 years earlier, when my grandmother was 73, and, according to the 3 medical evaluations attached, fully competent. His handwriting in the margin said, "Vivian, your granddaughter will understand when the time comes." The letter explained that my grandmother had established an irrevocable trust in 2018. The trust held the proceeds from decades of farmland sales, acreage my grandfather had purchased through the 1970s and 80s, parcels sold over 20 years as the land around the county seat appreciated. The total, after investment growth and property settlements, was $4,200,000. The sole beneficiary was me, Wanda Ann Whitfield. The trustee was Glenn Harrigan, not my mother, not my father, not anyone in the family. An independent attorney my grandmother had chosen specifically because he had no ties to any of us. Attached to the trust documents were 3 annual medical evaluations, each performed by a different physician, each confirming that Vivian Whitfield was of sound mind at the time of the trust's creation. My grandmother had done this on purpose. She had gone to 3 doctors, not one. She had done it across 3 separate years. She had made certain that no one could later say she did not know what she was doing. There was a second section in the envelope, a manila folder labeled in my grandmother's handwriting. The label said, "For Wanda only?" I opened it. Inside were bank statements, 7 years of bank statements from my grandmother's personal checking and savings accounts. Every page had yellow highlighter marks. The highlights ran down columns of withdrawals, electronic transfers, checks, cash withdrawals. The amounts started small in the first year. $200 here, $350 there. By the 6th year, the highlighted amounts were $4,000 a month. The yellow highlights were in my grandmother's hand. I could tell because the lines grew less steady year by year, firm in 2017, slightly wavering by 2020, shaky but deliberate by 2023. She had been tracking this while her hands were failing her. She had held the highlighter the way she held a kitchen knife in her last years, with both hands, because one was not enough anymore. The name on every withdrawal slip was the same, Lorraine M. Whitfield. I sat in Colleen's office for 40 minutes going through the statements. Colleen brought the glass of water. She set it on a coaster and did not interrupt. The total was approximately $340,000 over 7 years. The pattern was methodical. My mother was, after all, an accountant by training. Small amounts first, listed as groceries and home maintenance. Then larger transfers marked as medical expenses that, when I cross-referenced them against the insurance statements in the same folder, did not match any actual medical bills. The numbers were close enough to look legitimate at a glance, and far enough apart to be deliberate. I found the one I had been looking for without knowing I was looking for it. March 2022. A transfer of $22,000. That was the month Brianna's boutique lease deposit was due. I knew the date because Brianna had posted about signing the lease on Instagram. The caption said, "Dreams do not build themselves." She thanked our mother. She did not thank our grandmother. Colleen spoke for the first time in 20 minutes. "Your grandmother documented everything. She tracked every withdrawal against your mother's personal bank deposits. She could not stop the transfers. Your mother held the power of attorney, but she made certain there would be a record. Why did she not tell me?" Colleen paused. She folded her hands on the desk. "She told me you had enough on your plate. She said you were building your own life, and she did not want to hand you a fight you did not ask for. She said she would handle it her way." I looked at the highlighted pages. The yellow marks in 2018 were neat, precise, centered on each number. The marks in 2023 were wider, slightly off-center, as if the hand holding the pen had to concentrate just to stay on the line. But they were there. Everyone. She had not stopped. My grandmother could not stop her daughter-in-law from taking the money, but she could make sure someone, someday, would know exactly how much was taken, by whom, and when. She chose me. The clock on the wall ticked. I had been holding my breath. I did not realize it until I let it go, and the sound seemed too loud for the room. I closed the folder and asked Colleen for Glenn Harrigan's phone number. I called Glenn Harrigan from my car, hands-free, parked in the bank lot with the engine running because the heater took 3 minutes to work. His voice was steady and unhurried, the kind of voice that comes from decades of delivering complicated news to people who are not ready to hear it. "Miss Whitfield, I have been waiting for this call. Your grandmother told me it would come within 2 weeks of the funeral. She was right." He confirmed everything. The trust was irrevocable. Once created, it could not be altered or revoked, not by my mother, not by any executor. It existed outside the estate entirely. My grandmother had chosen this structure deliberately. Your grandmother came to me 8 years ago, Glenn said. She sat in my office for 2 hours. She had a yellow legal pad with notes on both sides. She said she wanted to protect one thing. He paused. You. I asked about the bank statements, the highlighted withdrawals, the $340,000. Glenn said the documents were informational. They were not yet part of any legal proceeding. I had options. I could file a civil suit for breach of fiduciary duty. My mother had exceeded the scope of her power of attorney, or I could present the evidence privately to the family first. Your grandmother wanted you to have a choice, he said. She did not want to force your hand. She said you would know the right thing to do when the time came. I asked him how he could be sure the trust would hold up if challenged. He said my grandmother had planned for that too. 3 independent medical evaluations, bank visit logs, amendment signatures witnessed by Colleen. Your grandmother was not just careful, he said. She was thorough. She spent 2 years making this airtight because she knew your mother would try to break it. I need a few days, I said. Take what you need. The trust is not going anywhere. I hung up and sat in the parking lot. The engine ticked. Through my windshield, I could see my apartment building. 2nd floor, the window with the student artwork taped to the glass, backlit by the hallway light. A watercolor rainbow and a crayon drawing of a dog that might be a horse, and a self-portrait of a boy with wings. I turned the car off and went inside. I made dinner. I graded spelling tests. I did not call my mother. Monday morning, fractions. I cut paper plates into halves, thirds, quarters, and sixths. 22 third graders arranged them on their desks like puzzles. Marcus, the boy who drew himself with wings, raised his hand and asked if a pizza could be divided into 1,000,000 pieces. I said technically yes, but you would need a very sharp knife and a lot of patience. He said that sounded like his mom at dinner time. At 10:15, a girl named Sophie told me I seemed different. You are quieter, Miss Whitfield, I said. Sometimes quiet is how people think. She accepted this with the seriousness of an 8-year-old who believes adults have access to information she does not yet possess. She was not wrong. At lunch, I ate in my classroom. Turkey sandwich, apple, granola bar. A colleague stopped by the doorway, a 4th grade teacher named Dawn, who had been at the school for 20 years. She said she had seen the obituary for my grandmother. Are you doing okay? I nodded. I said I was. Dawn did not press. Teachers are good at reading faces, and mine said, ask me later, not now. She left a tangerine on my desk and walked away without another word. After school, I graded papers and thought about the trust. $4,200,000. I did the math on a sticky note. It was 87 years of my salary. I stared at the number for a long time, then folded the sticky note and put it in my desk drawer next to a box of gold star stickers and a half-finished bag of trail mix. The number did not feel real. The bank statements felt real. The yellow highlights felt real. The way my grandmother's handwriting got shakier each year. That felt real. But the money was an abstraction, like telling a child that the sun is 93 million miles away. The number is true. It just does not help you understand the heat. I went home and made Grandma Vivian's pot roast from memory, the one she never wrote down because she said some things are supposed to be passed hand to hand, not page to page. Brown the meat first, always. Low heat for the onions. Rosemary from the plant on the windowsill, not the jar in the cabinet. The apartment smelled like her kitchen by 6:30. I ate alone at the table where the oak box had sat 2 days earlier. The chair across from me was empty, but the smell was not. The voicemails started on a Tuesday, 4 days after the funeral. The first one was calm. My mother's voice was measured, professional. The same tone she used when she called the insurance company or scheduled a doctor's appointment. Wanda, the estate attorney needs all of Mom's personal effects inventoried. The box is part of that process. Please bring it to the house this week. Thank you. She said, thank you, the way people say, this conversation is over. Wednesday. A text from Brianna. Mom is really upset. Can you just give her the box? It is not worth the fight. Call me. Thursday. Voicemail 2. Less calm. Wanda, I do not know what you think is in that box, but everything in Mom's estate goes through me. I am the executor. I have already contacted the estate attorney. If you do not cooperate, he will reach out directly. Friday evening, my father called. Not from the house phone, from his cell, which meant he was in his truck, which meant he had left the house to make the call where my mother could not hear him. Wanda, honey. A pause. Your mother is not sleeping? She is on the phone with the attorney every morning. Can you just talk to her? Just a conversation. That is all she is asking. That was not all she was asking. My mother did not make phone calls for conversation. She made phone calls for outcomes. I answered none of them. Not Brianna's text. Not my mother's voicemails. Not my father's careful, quiet Friday call. I set my phone on the kitchen counter, face down, next to a stack of third-grade spelling tests, and I let it buzz. It buzzed 11 times that week. I answered 0 of them. My mother had spent 7 years controlling when I could see my grandmother. 7 years deciding which visits were approved, which phone calls were allowed, which holidays I was invited to, and which I learned about afterward from Brianna's Instagram. 7 years of managing access the way a building manager controls who gets a key card. She could wait. I graded the spelling tests instead. 22 students, 18 words each. Marcus spelled necessary with 2 C's. Sophie spelled beautiful correctly and drew a small flower beside it. I put a gold star on both because effort is effort, and because I had learned that week that the people who notice things are not always the ones who spell them right. 3 weeks after I opened the box, a certified letter arrived. I was standing at the mailbox at 7:15 in the morning, still in the coat I wore to school, keys in one hand and a travel mug of coffee in the other. The green USPS card was tucked inside the mailbox flag. The envelope was white, legal size, with the return address of a firm I did not recognize. Buckner and Associates, attorneys at law. The letter was 2 pages. It was addressed to me, but it was written for my mother. The language was formal and specific. It stated that Vivian Whitfield had been diagnosed with early-stage cognitive decline in 2019. It stated that any trust created by Vivian during a period of diminished capacity may be subject to legal challenge. It demanded full disclosure of all trust documents, beneficiary designations, and trustee communications. My mother was not contesting the trust as executor. She was contesting it as a concerned family member protecting the integrity of the estate. The distinction was legal. The intent was personal. I stood at the mailbox and read it twice. My hands did not shake. I had spent 15 years watching my mother control every room she entered. This was just a bigger room. I called Glenn from my car before pulling out of the parking lot. She filed, I said. I know. I received a copy this morning. His voice was the same as before. Steady. Measured. The voice of a man who builds walls for a living and is not surprised when someone tries to knock one down. We anticipated this. That is why your grandmother obtained 3 separate competency evaluations. That is why she chose an independent trustee. She built this trust the way a carpenter builds a house in a hurricane zone, with the storm already in mind. What do? You respond. Through me. We have the medical evaluations, the bank records, the trust amendments she signed in person. Their argument is that she was declining. Our evidence is that she was planning. He paused. She prepared for this, Wanda. The question is, are you prepared for what comes next? I said yes. It was the first time in my life I was not sure I was telling the truth. When I stood at my mailbox holding that certified letter, I thought about every time I had let someone else write the story of who I was. If you have ever been the one in your family who kept quiet because you thought peace mattered more than being heard, I want you to know something. Peace is not silence. It is choosing when to speak. Hit subscribe if this story is hitting close to home. Drop a comment and tell me. Have you ever had to stand up to the person who raised you? Glenn's office was on the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian house in the center of town. The stairs creaked. The waiting room smelled like old carpet and lemon furniture polish. His conference room had law books floor to ceiling, a fern in the corner that needed water, and a table large enough for 8 people, but set for 2. He had folders spread across the surface. 3 medical evaluations in clear plastic sleeves, bank records in chronological order, trust amendments with notarized signatures, security camera logs from the bank showing my grandmother entering and exiting on 4 separate occasions between 2018 and 2021. Your grandmother was not just careful, Glenn said, sliding the camera logs toward me. She walked into this bank 4 times in person to review the trust. She signed amendment letters each time. The bank's trust officer will testify that Vivian was sharp, engaged, and asked detailed questions about asset allocation. What about my mother's attorney? What will they argue? Early stage decline. They will point to the 2019 diagnosis and argue that any legal document created after that date is suspect. He tapped the medical evaluations. 3 doctors, 3 separate years. Each one confirmed cognitive competency at the time of the trust's creation and subsequent reviews. Lorraine's attorney can argue whatever he wants. The paper trail says otherwise. He opened the manila folder. The bank statements. The power of attorney document your mother held authorized management of daily living expenses. Not transfers to personal accounts. Not $22,000 deposits to fund your sister's business. The language is narrow, and your grandmother made sure of that. I looked at the statements. The yellow highlights were methodical, consistent. My grandmother had tracked her own money being taken from her, not because she could stop it, but because she wanted someone to know. I want a meeting, I said. Everyone in the same room. Brianna, my father, my mother, her attorney, you. Glenn raised an eyebrow. Why Brianna? Because some of that money paid for her boutique. She deserves to know where it came from. He nodded slowly. Your grandmother said you would want it done face to face. I drove back to school for the afternoon. The kids were doing a group project on monarch butterflies. How they migrate 2,000 miles to a place they have never been but somehow know is theirs. My father called on a Saturday afternoon. Not from the house. From his truck, parked in a hardware store lot. I could hear the announcement chime through his window. Your mother wants me to tell you something, he said. She says she spent 7 years caring for your grandmother. 7 years of bathing her, driving her to appointments, managing her prescriptions, handling the property taxes when the assessor raised them. She sold the last 3 parcels of farmland to cover expenses. I said nothing. I let him talk. She says nobody else offered. You were teaching. Brianna was starting the business. I was retired. He paused. She says the withdrawals were compensation. She never took a salary for caregiving. She says it was the same as a home aide getting paid, except she was family. My father delivered this the way he delivered most things, carefully, as if he were carrying something fragile through a doorway that was slightly too narrow. He did not say whether he believed it. He did not say whether he had seen the bank statements. He just passed the message. I know she did the caregiving, Dad. She did. A beat. She did. Did she ever ask Grandma if the withdrawals were okay? The silence was long enough that I heard the hardware store chime twice more. I do not know, he said. I let that sit. I did not push. My father was a school custodian for 31 years. He knew how to fix broken faucets and loose floorboards and stuck windows. He knew how to walk into a room where something was wrong and quietly make it right without anyone noticing. But he had never learned how to fix broken people. He did not have the tools for it, and nobody had taught him, and the people he loved most had never asked him to try. Dad? Yeah. What do you think? Another long silence. I could hear him breathing. I think your grandmother was the most organized woman I ever met, and I think if she wanted something done a certain way, she made sure it happened. He hung up. I heard his truck engine start through the speaker before the line went dead. He drove somewhere. I hope it was somewhere quiet. I drove past Brianna's boutique on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks into the legal standoff. The storefront was tasteful. White brick facade, gold lettering on the glass that read, Flourish, in a font that probably cost somebody $500. Through the window, I could see Brianna arranging a display of candles on a reclaimed wood shelf. She was wearing a cashmere sweater the color of oatmeal, and her hair was pulled back with a clip that I suspected cost more than my car payment. I did not go in. I parked across the street and did the math. The boutique lease deposit, $22,000, March 2022. The renovation. I had seen the contractor's truck outside for 6 weeks the previous spring, and Brianna had posted the before and after photos. Based on the scope of the work, I estimated $40,000 to $50,000. First-year inventory: the hand-poured candles, the linen scarves, the artisanal soaps that came in packaging designed to look rustic but were manufactured in a facility in New Jersey. Another $25,000 to $30,000 at least. That was close to $100,000 in startup costs. My sister had not taken out a business loan. She had said so on Instagram. No debt, just determination. The caption read. She thanked our mother for believing in her. I did not blame Brianna. She took what was offered. She did not ask where it came from because the answer she was given, "Mom is helping me," was simple and warm and required no follow-up questions. Brianna was not dishonest. She was comfortable, and comfort does not ask for receipts. A customer walked in. Through the glass, I watched Brianna greet her. A smile, a gesture toward the new display. Professional and genuine. My sister was good at this. The boutique was not a vanity project. It was real. That made it harder. If the store had been a failure, a hobby, something Brianna abandoned after 6 months, the source of the money would have been an insult. But Brianna had built something. She just did not know whose foundation she was standing on. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, then drove home. Through the window, the gold lettering caught the morning sun the same way the brass on my grandmother's box had caught the kitchen light when I was 12 years old. I wondered if Brianna would keep the boutique after she knew. I wondered if she would want to. The calls started in the 4th week. Cousin after cousin. Aunt Carol, who was my mother's sister and had the same voice but louder. Uncle Pete, who called from his boat and sounded like he was reading from a script. 3 people from my grandmother's church, who I had not spoken to since the funeral. The message was consistent. My mother had been talking. "Wanda, your mother says you took a box from the funeral and will not return it. Is that true?" That was Aunt Carol. She did not wait for an answer. "Lorraine has been a saint to that woman for 7 years. She gave up her career, her social life, her health. Whatever is in that box, it is not yours to keep." "I heard you hired a lawyer." That was Uncle Pete. "Wanda, your grandmother would not have wanted this. Family does not sue family." The narrative my mother had planted was precise. Wanda is ungrateful. Wanda is greedy. Wanda took advantage of the funeral, a sacred event, to steal estate property. Wanda has hired attorneys to fight her own mother. Wanda, who earns $48,000 a year teaching 3rd grade, suddenly believes she is entitled to her grandmother's things. Not one of them asked what was in the box. Not one. Then it got closer. My coworker Dawn stopped me in the hallway on a Thursday and said, "Wanda, I want you to know something. The school office got a phone call this morning. Someone asking about your employment status and whether you had any outstanding debts." I asked who called. Dawn said the caller did not leave a name. The secretary described a woman's voice. Polite. Specific in her questions, the kind of person who phrases requests as though they are routine when they are anything but. I knew the voice. My mother was checking my financial records, building a story, that I was in debt, that I was desperate, that the box was a cash grab by a woman who needed the money. She was constructing a motive the way she constructed everything else. Methodically, with documentation, filed and cross-referenced. I did not explain myself to any of them. Explaining yourself to people who have already chosen their version is like grading a test the student already turned in blank. The answers are not going to appear. By the 3rd week, 12 people had called me. Not one of them asked what was actually in the box. My father showed up on a Saturday evening without calling first. He stood in the doorway of my apartment holding a brown paper grocery bag in one arm and his truck keys in the other. He was wearing the plaid flannel shirt he had owned since I was in middle school and a pair of work boots that still had sawdust from a project I did not know about. He did not mention the box. He did not mention the trust or the certified letter or the phone calls from 12 family members. He walked past me, set the groceries on the counter, and started putting them away. Milk in the fridge, bread on the shelf, bananas on the counter next to the flour canister where I kept my grandmother's rosemary plant cutting. He made coffee, 2 cups. He set mine on the table across from his and sat down. We sat for a while without speaking. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator humming and the faint sound of the neighbor's television through the wall. My father looked at the student artwork on the fridge, the watercolor rainbow, the horse dog, Marcus's self-portrait with wings. "Your grandmother would have loved these," he said. "She did," I said. "I used to bring them to her." I said it in the past tense because it was past tense. I brought artwork to my grandmother's house every other week until my mother decided the visits were too frequent, too stimulating, too much for a woman whose world was being systematically narrowed to one caregiver, one schedule, one set of decisions, all made by the same person. My father's jaw tightened. He looked into his coffee. The mug had printed on it, in blue letters, "World's Best Teacher." Brianna had given it to me 3 Christmases ago, which meant my mother had picked it out and Brianna had wrapped it. My father did not ask me about the trust. He did not ask me what I was going to do. He did not offer advice or take sides or say the thing that husbands are supposed to say when their wives are in the wrong. He just sat with me. He drank coffee. He looked at the drawings my students had made and did not say what he was thinking, which was probably the same thing I was thinking, which was that the simplest things in this apartment, the art, the coffee, the $15 reading chair, were more honest than anything in the house he had lived in for 40 years. He stood up at 8:30. At the door, he turned. "Whatever happens," he said, "you are still my kid." He did not say the same about my mother. He did not need to. If you have ever sat at a table set for one and wondered whether the people who were supposed to love you ever really saw you, I need you to know something. That feeling does not make you weak. It makes you the only honest person in the room. Brianna called on a Wednesday evening. Her voice was not hostile, but it was firm. The voice of a woman who had been given a version of events and was trying to decide how firmly to hold it. "Wanda, Mom showed me the legal filing. She says the trust was created when Grandma was not well. If that is true, the money should go back to the estate." "Mom showed you the filing?" "Yes." "Did she show you the bank statements?" A pause. "What bank statements?" "Ask her about the March 2022 withdrawal, $22,000. Ask her where the money went." Silence. I could hear Brianna breathing. In the background, the faint sound of something. Wind chimes, maybe? She was on her porch. "What are you talking about, Wanda?" "The month your boutique deposit was due. Ask Mom where the money came from. Then ask yourself if you still want the trust voided." She hung up. I do not know if she was angry or frightened or confused. Probably all three. In the way you feel all three when the ground beneath a thing you built starts to shift and you realize the foundation was never yours. I sat alone in my apartment that night. The locked oak box, empty now, sat on my bookshelf between a copy of Charlotte's Web and a binder of lesson plans. It looked smaller than it had in the chapel. Lighter, but harder to look at, because empty things sometimes carry more weight than full ones. I thought about my father's words from Thanksgiving 3 years ago. "Your grandmother always had her own way of doing things." He had said it like a fact. He had not known it was a prophecy. My grandmother did not just leave me money, she left me proof. And proof is a heavier thing to carry than a box. Because money is a number. Proof is a choice. It sits in your hands and it waits for you to decide what to do with it. And it does not care whether you are ready. And it does not go away just because you set it on a shelf and try to live a normal life. The rosemary plant on the windowsill was still green. I watered it before bed. I met Glenn at his office on a Friday afternoon. The fern in the corner had been watered since my last visit, which I took as a good sign. He had the folders laid out across the table in the order he planned to present them. Medical evaluations first, then the bank's security logs, then the trust amendments, then the bank statements. At the end of the table, in a folder by itself, was the power of attorney document. "The language is narrow," Glenn said, tapping the power of attorney. Lorraine was authorized to manage daily living expenses, groceries, medications, utility bills. The document does not authorize transfers to personal accounts, capital investments, or third-party gifts. The $22,000 to your sister. That is a textbook breach. Will Lorraine's attorney argue it was compensation for caregiving? He will try. But compensation requires either a written agreement between the caregiver and the care recipient or approval from a court. Neither exists. Lorraine never asked your grandmother for permission. She never filed a petition. She just took it. He paused. And she filed it in her own cabinet by month, with receipts. The irony was not lost on either of us. My mother's meticulous record-keeping, the thing she was most proud of, the filing cabinet she referenced like a trophy, was the very thing that made the evidence incontestable. She had organized her own paper trail. Their argument comes down to one thing, Glenn said. Mental capacity. If they can prove your grandmother was declining when the trust was created, everything else falls apart. But we have 3 doctors and a bank officer who say otherwise. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. Handwritten. My grandmother's script, shakier than the note in the box, but legible. Your grandmother wrote this 6 months before she died. She asked me to give it to you at the right moment. He looked at me. I believe this is the moment. I read it. I will not tell you what it said. Not yet. But I can tell you that when I finished reading, I set the paper down, pressed both palms flat on the table, and stayed like that for a full minute. Glenn did not interrupt. I folded the letter and put it in my coat pocket, next to my car keys and a gold star sticker I had forgotten to remove. Schedule the meeting, I said. Everyone in the room. The night before the meeting, I sat at my kitchen table with my grandmother's letter. The handwriting was familiar but diminished. The same strong strokes compressed into a smaller space, as if her hand had to work harder to say the same things. The ink was blue. One corner of the paper was slightly smudged, the way it gets when someone rests their wrist on wet ink before it dries. She had been writing slowly. I will tell you what the letter said, because my grandmother would have wanted me to. She wrote that she knew what Lorraine had been doing. She had known for years. She had tracked it not because she expected to confront Lorraine. She knew by then that confrontation with Lorraine was like arguing with a locked door, but because she wanted someone to have the truth after she was gone. She wrote that she chose not to fight publicly because she did not want my father caught in the middle. Russell is a good man who married a difficult woman, she wrote. That is not a crime. It is a heartbreak. She wrote that she chose to protect me differently, by building something Lorraine could not see and could not reach. You were the only one who visited me because you wanted to, not because you needed something, she wrote. That is how I knew. She ended the letter with a line I have carried with me every day since. The people who love you do not always fight for you the loudest. Sometimes they plan for you the quietest. I cried. It was the first time since the funeral. Not dramatic. I did not put my head on the table or make a sound. I just sat there and let it happen the way rain happens. Without announcement, without apology. The tears fell on the table and I wiped them with the sleeve of my sweatshirt, and that was that. I washed my face. I laid out clothes for the next morning. The navy blazer I wear for parent-teacher conferences. It was the most professional thing I owned. Good enough for meeting parents. Good enough for meeting the truth. I set my alarm for 6. I was not nervous. I was something harder to name. The feeling you get when you realize that someone who loved you believed in a day you had not yet lived, and now the day is here, and you have to be the person they saw when they looked at you. Glenn's conference room, 10 o'clock in the morning, the table set for 7. On one side, my mother in a charcoal blazer, her attorney Bennett, a man in his 50s with a bald spot he compensated for with an expensive tie, and Brianna, who sat between them like someone waiting for a train she was not sure she wanted to board. On the other side, me, in my Navy parent-teacher conference blazer, and Glenn, with 4 folders arranged in front of him like place settings. My father sat at the head of the table. He had not been asked to sit there. He chose it, I noticed. Bennett spoke first. He was efficient and rehearsed. He said that Vivian Whitfield had been diagnosed with early-stage cognitive decline in 2019. He said that any legal instrument created after that date should be reviewed for validity. He said his client, he gestured to my mother, was acting in the best interest of the family and the estate. My mother nodded while he spoke. Her face was composed. She looked like a woman at a board meeting, not a woman sitting across from her daughter with 7 years of bank statements between them. Glenn opened the first folder. He placed 3 medical evaluations on the table, 2018, 2019, 2020. 3 different physicians. He read the concluding statements aloud. Each one confirmed that Vivian Whitfield was of sound mind at the time of examination. Oriented to time, place, and person. Demonstrates consistent decision-making capacity. No evidence of undue influence. Bennett said the evaluations could have been arranged during lucid periods and did not reflect overall decline. Glenn opened the second folder. Bank security logs. 4 visits between 2018 and 2021. Time-stamped. Vivian's signature on trust amendments during each visit. The bank's trust officer will testify that Mrs. Whitfield asked detailed questions about asset allocation, Glenn said. She brought a legal pad with notes. My mother shifted in her chair. Glenn opened the third folder. The bank statements. 7 years. Yellow highlights. He set them in the center of the table, facing my mother. Mrs. Whitfield transferred approximately $340,000 from Vivian's accounts over 7 years, he said. The power of attorney authorized daily living expenses. These transfers do not qualify. He turned to my mother. Mrs. Whitfield, your mother-in-law tracked every withdrawal. She matched every transfer to your personal bank deposits. She used your own system, monthly, organized by category. He paused. She was thorough because you taught her to be. The room was quiet. Brianna was looking at the March 2022 statement. I watched her eyes find the number. $22,000. I watched her mouth open slightly and then close. She knew. She had not known before, but she knew now. My father's hands were flat on the table, fingers slightly spread, the way you press your hands on something when you need to feel it is solid. He stared at the bank statements. He did not speak. Bennett leaned over and whispered something to my mother. My mother's face changed. Not guilt, not anger. It was the expression of someone who has just realized that the defense they built their entire identity around. I sacrificed. I cared. I earned this. Is collapsing in a room full of people who can see the collapse happening in real time. She said nothing. The conference room door opened. A woman in her 50s walked in, still wearing her winter coat. Her name was Margaret. She had been my grandmother's homemaid for the last 2 years of her life, hired by my mother, paid from my grandmother's accounts, but loyal in a way that money cannot buy and cannot erase. Glenn had invited her. My mother had not known. Margaret stood at the end of the table. She looked at my mother briefly, then looked away. She spoke directly to the room. Vivian asked me to be here. She said those exact words, 4 months before she passed. She said, if Wanda ever has to sit in a room full of people who do not believe her, I want someone there who saw what I saw. Margaret explained. My grandmother had been lucid in her final years. Not always, not every day, but enough. Enough to notice the bank statements arriving in envelopes her daughter-in-law opened first. Enough to ask Margaret to mail a letter to Glenn's office without Lorraine knowing. Enough to say, on a Tuesday afternoon while Lorraine was at the pharmacy, Margaret, my daughter-in-law is taking my money. I cannot stop her, but I can make sure my granddaughter knows. Margaret's hands were shaking. She was not a public speaker. She was a woman who had bathed an elderly woman and read to her and brought her tea and kept a secret because she was asked to by someone who trusted her with the only thing she had left. The truth. Brianna was crying. Not loud. Her shoulders moved slightly, and she pressed a tissue to her nose without looking at anyone. My father was still looking at the table, but his jaw was set in a way I had not seen since I was a child. I stood. I did not raise my voice. I unfolded my grandmother's letter and read the final paragraph aloud. I am not leaving this money to Wanda because she needs it. I am leaving it to her because she is the only person in this family who never asked me for anything. And that is exactly why she deserves it. The room was silent. Margaret pulled her coat tighter. Brianna looked at the ceiling. My father looked at me. Really looked. The way you look at someone when you realize you have been seeing the outline of them for years and are only now filling in the details. My mother sat very still. She did not apologize. She did not explain. She looked at the bank statements the way you look at a mirror when you are not ready for what it shows you. Bennett closed his folder. Bennett advised my mother to withdraw the legal challenge to the trust. She did. The paperwork was filed the following week. The trust stood. $4,200,000, managed by Glenn Harrigan as trustee. Sole beneficiary Wanda Ann Whitfield. Glenn filed a formal complaint with the State Bar's Elder Law Division regarding the $340,000 in unauthorized transfers. It was a civil matter. Not criminal. Not yet. Lorraine would face an investigation, a potential order of restitution, and the permanent record of what she had done. I did not ask for criminal charges. I do not want my mother in a courtroom, I told Glenn. I want her in a mirror. My father called that evening. His voice was different, heavier, the way a house settles after a storm. I should have been paying attention, he said. You are paying attention now, I said. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Your grandmother was right about you. He did not say what she had been right about. He did not need to. Brianna texted 2 days later. Just 2 lines. Can we talk? Not today, but soon. I wrote back. Whenever you are ready. I found the recipe box in a storage unit my mother had rented in the next town over. Glenn's paralegal discovered the unit during the document audit. Lorraine had moved several of my grandmother's personal effects there after the funeral, presumably to control what remained of the estate's inventory. The recipe box was on a shelf between 2 cardboard boxes of old linens. I brought it home. I opened it on my kitchen counter. The index cards were still inside. My grandmother's precise handwriting, recipes for pot roast, cornbread, lemon cake, the rhubarb pie she made every June. Underneath the last card, handwritten on the inside of the lid, was a note. The oak box is for the bank, the recipe box is for your heart. I set the recipe box next to the flour canister on my counter, in the same spot my grandmother had kept it in her kitchen for 40 years. The brass hardware caught the kitchen light from the window the way it always had. A small glow, warm and steady, at about 7 in the morning. 2 boxes from the same tree. One was for what I was owed. The other was for what I was given. 6 months later, I still teach 3rd grade. I did not quit. I did not take a sabbatical. I did not move to a coast or buy a sports car or post pictures of my new life on any social media platform. I went back to school the Monday after the meeting and taught fractions and read aloud from chapter books and put gold star stickers on spelling tests, because that is what I do, and that is who I am. And $4 million does not change the parts of you that were never about money in the first place. I bought a house. Small. 2 bedrooms, a porch, a yard with a garden. The first thing I planted was rosemary, because my grandmother's kitchen always smelled like rosemary, and because some debts you repay, not in dollars, but in living the way someone taught you to live. I set up a scholarship fund at my school, the Vivian Whitfield Fund for students who need books and school supplies. Marcus was the first recipient. He used the money to buy a set of colored pencils and a sketchbook. He drew himself again, still with wings, but this time he was standing on the ground. I still drive the same car. It still starts on the 3rd try. Some things you keep because they remind you of who you were before you had choices. Brianna visited twice. We sat on my porch and drank coffee and did not talk about the boutique, and did not talk about the bank statements, and did not pretend that everything was fine. We talked about Grandma Vivian's lemon cake and whether either of us had the recipe right. We are not close yet, but the door is open and neither of us has closed it. My father comes for dinner every Sunday. He brings groceries. He puts them away the same way every time. Milk in the fridge, bread on the shelf, bananas on the counter. He never mentions my mother. He brings the coffee mug that says "World's Best Teacher" from his house, because he says the coffee tastes better in it. Lorraine has not contacted me. The civil investigation is ongoing. It is a Thursday evening and I am making pot roast. The recipe is from memory. Brown the meat first. Low heat for the onions. Rosemary from the plant on the windowsill. The kitchen smells the way my grandmother's kitchen used to smell, and for a moment I am 12 years old, standing on a step stool, reading index cards while she cooked. On the fridge, taped next to Marcus's newest drawing, there is a card he made for me last week. It says, "Miss Whitfield, you are my favorite teacher because you always listen." He drew a small star in the corner. I gave him a gold star sticker in return. I opened the recipe box. Inside, beneath the lemon cake recipe and the cornbread recipe and the rhubarb pie recipe, there is one more note. I have read it many times now, but I read it again tonight because some things do not wear out with reading. Wanda, you do not need a box to know what is yours. You carry it. Grandma. I close the lid and set it back on the counter. The brass is warm from the kitchen light. Through the window, the rosemary is still green. The pot roast is almost done. My grandmother taught me that the strongest thing you can do is prepare quietly and act when the moment arrives. If this story moved you, subscribe to Calm Drama Stories for more true-style family stories. There is a new story every week in the description below. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it. Sometimes the right story at the right time is its own kind of inheritance.